We are here in Denver, Colorado with John, I'm sorry, what was your last name again?
Maestas.
Maestas. Here representing Abilene Christian University, the History Department. It is May 20th. My name is Michelle Colvin. And just to get started, what battalion were you in?
With the Headquarters Company 66th Armored Infantry Battalion.
Let's just start at the beginning. Do you remember the Depression in the 20s and 30s?
A little bit.
What were your parents like? Do you remember how they dealt with it and
nice.
that?
Nice parents.
How did they deal with the Depression and that?
Well, we were lucky that my dad had a job at the smelter in Leadville, so we didn't have too much trouble with the Depression. He was making reasonable income to keep us comfortable, so we didn't notice the Depression too much.
Great. How many children were in the family?
We had 8 boys and 2 girls.
And you mentioned earlier that you lived in a small town. What was the name of that?
That was Leadville.
Colorado.
Leadville, Colorado. That's where the smelter was located.
When did you sign up into the Army?
Well, right after I graduated from high school, I was drafted in. My twin brother and I went in together.
And how did you feel about that? Were you excited or were you not?
It was comfortable in a way, having him along all the time, because I didn't have to look for friends. I already had a friend with me, so that made it pleasant. But it also, after we got into combat and stuff like that, I always had some extra person to worry about. So that was kind of sad.
Yeah. What was your? You said that you were drafted in right after high school.
Yes.
Did you want to go to college, or was that an option?
Well, at that time it was no option. We weren't that well financially stable. And going into service was the thing that's going on, or had been going on for 2 or 3 years by the time I was drafted. So I went into Fort Knox. I didn't start with the division. I took tank training in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And then from there I was supposed to go into Army Specialized Training. But we got sent to a replacement depot because for some reason or other they decided to cancel the Army Specialized Training. I think the A-bomb had something to do with that. But nobody ever told me why, but instead they sent us to the 12th Armored Division in Camp Barkley. They'd lost some men in a truck accident. The water detail got hit by a train, so they lost some men, so we went in to replace those people. So that's the way I ended up in the 12th Armored.
What do you remember about Camp Barkley? Do you remember what year it was? You went in?
1943, 1942. It was we got about 11 months there, so it was hot, dry, rained it was raining in the daytime and sand was hitting the faces. But it was to me it was a big adventure, because I had never been out of Leadville except for in small towns around there, so it was pretty nice, and I was learning something new every day, so I sort of enjoyed the training and all the equipment and all the different people I met. So it was pretty much of a adventure and education in a way. Little town like Leadville, it's real isolated. There wasn't too much. There was still clannish, but it was there wasn't much there to learn about. We only had radios there. There was no TV or anything like that. One newspaper. So the outside world was just something that was happening to us. We weren't too up to date. It showed in the way I went in the experiences I had in the Army in training. And things showed that I didn't have the ability to deal with people that were strangers to me. Like we had a bunch of people from New York City that were, you might say, streetwise, and they used to take advantage of us in a lot of ways. But we learned fast.
Can you explain one instance that you remember where they gave you a hard time?
Well, there wasn't really little con stuff, you know, like we had that one fella that every payday come by to borrow a nickel from everybody. But he'd make $5, $6, $7, $8, $10 in a month, and he never remember to pay you back. So pretty soon he started getting wise to that kind of stuff. You know, he'd end up $5, $10 richer every month from borrowing. All the little dummies would give him a nickel.
What was his reason for getting a nickel from everybody?
Just to have extra money. See, wages then were what, $21 a month or something like that. Mm-hmm. So nickel was a lot of money. He'd go play poker or something with you, whatever he wanted to do, drink beer.
Do you remember having passes to Abilene?
Yeah. There was a little restaurant, I think it's called the Pheasant. It used to have the best fried chicken. We used to go over there all the time. A buddy of mine was that been with me in the training, the basic training and stuff like that, was in the 56th Infantry Division, an A Company, and he was in the barracks next door to us. So my brother and I and him would always go together into town and head for that little restaurant, eat chicken.
What was your brother's name?
John. His name was John B, and my name was John D. Mm-hmm. Gave him what it fit when I first got there, because they used to scratch me off the KP lists and everything, and he was doing KP and I wasn't. They didn't know they had two of us. The company clerks and that weren't. They were just using one of the names. So if we'd have been smart, we'd have just alternated. But he finally complained that I wasn't doing KP and he was. So they found out where I was there, and then after that, it was routine military stuff again.
Do you remember traveling to Camp Campbell?
I never was in Camp Campbell.
Oh, that's right.
I was in Fort Knox.
That's right.
In Fort Knox, we'd go into Louisville once in a while. That was my first experience with discrimination, when I walked into the black sector of Louisville and they asked me politely to leave. I wasn't aware that there was that much friction between whites and blacks till
then. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about that. What happened?
Well, we didn't have too much money, so we roamed the streets and look at the sights and stuff like that. We were just walking down the street and ended up in the black section. And a couple of nice people, they just walked up and says, "Fellas, you're in the wrong part of town." It says, you'll probably get in trouble if you just go any further in here. Just turn around and go back the other way. So that's what we did. We didn't argue. They just explained the facts of life to us, and we got out of there. But to me, it was kind of strange, because I wasn't used to that.
What did you think of the training that you got at Camp Barkley?
Real good. We had a real thorough training. We got all the tanks, the half-tracks, how to maintain them, how to shoot all the weapons and everything. See, most of the infantry people were getting something like 6 weeks, 3 months training. We had 6 months of training in Fort Knox before we left there. So we were pretty well. We knew our weapons and our equipment pretty well when we left there.
And you felt pretty confident with what you were doing?
Yeah, I felt. At that time, they told us we had the best weapons in the world, and I believed them. Later on, I found out that there was a few better weapons elsewhere. But at that time, I believed them.
What did you? How did you feel about the sergeants and officers during the training? Were they good people, or did you have problems with them? Or?
The ones I had to deal with, most of them were pretty good. They were strict, but I was used to being in school. I hadn't got out in the world where I was on my own too much, so I was used to having bosses and teachers and everybody tell me what to do, so it didn't bother me too much. especially when it was an environment that I didn't know what was going on anyway. So it made it pretty easy for me to learn stuff, and I just out of high school. So training was just continuation of my education. And I really believe that it was necessary to be there. But
What was your job in the unit?
I was one of the tank crews, and well, in the whole unit we had 3 tanks, and I was gunner and loader. I had passed my gunner's test with real high scores because I just happened that I put all 10 shots in our last test in the target, and they thought that was pretty good, and I did too. It's just luck, I guess. So they always consider me a pretty good gunner. So when I get assigned to a tank, they usually assign me the gunner. Once in a while, I'll trade off and go in the. I was also small in the cramped position in the tanker band. I could fit in there and load a lot faster than some of the bigger guys that didn't have the room to work in. So that's usually the 2 positions I played the most. I had help drive once in a while, but that was just when you were traveling long distances and everybody was getting tired. We rotate. Later on, after we got in the war, I got out of the tank and went into just hauling ammunition. But most of the time we were in the tanks.
Do you remember General Brewer?
I think I've only saw him once or twice when we were on formation, when he come in for inspections or something like that.
We were kind of curious as to what you had heard about his relief.
His release. All I know is one day they said General Allen was taken over, and they never did testify. He seemed all right to me. I didn't see enough. I didn't have much association with officers. I was one of the expendables, you might say.
And how did General Allen act and respond to the preparation?
You know, I never concerned myself too much with how the outfit was, the division was run. I stuck mostly with our battalion, our company, and our platoon, and make sure we could do our job right and let them handle the big stuff. Sometimes I think it'd been better if we'd have run it and they'd have changed places with it. But that was just personal opinion.
I'm sure you're not the only one that thought that.
They made their share of mistakes. Of course, we did too.
What do you remember about their maneuvers in Texas?
Maneuvers in Texas, we'd make maneuvers into Camp Bowie and everything, places like that. But they were pretty routine. Nothing happened that was spectacular because it was all pretend. And nothing like the real stuff. Everything you plan and think that's going to happen never does. So, but it taught us how to operate our equipment and how to get lost and find our way back and stuff like that. That's about it.
Kenna, you went to Camp Shank after that.
Camp Shanks, yes.
And what was the travel like to New York?
To New York, we were on the train day and night. We just had private compartments, about 4 or 5 men. We did mostly just play poker, penny ante poker all the way up there, and read books or talk to each other. Didn't have much to say to each other. We were sort of surprised that we were finally going over there. You know, it just puts you in suspended animation, like it's what you were waiting for, but you're not really sure you want to go. But we made it all right. Kept the Camp Shank. Got to go overseas on the Empress of Australia was the name of an old German ship, big luxury liner that the English had taken over. That was a pretty nice trip because all the other ships were smaller and people were getting seasick, and we just sat there real comfortable. Our ship is barely, it's just a luxury ship. We had the holes in the bottom, but it held the water pretty good. It didn't make us seasick. Like the ship coming back got us all sick. We had an old Liberty ship. He even cracked the plate coming back. But the one going over trip to England was about 13 days long, but it wasn't uncomfortable at all to me. The food wasn't good, but.
And how long was the ship travel?
We traveled, took us about 13 days to get across because they were zigzagging. They wasn't going straight across. There's a lot of submarines and stuff out there, and they had to avoid all that stuff. So one day we were traveling this way, and the next day we wasn't getting much headway that way, making V's and stuff. But there wasn't much to do there. I had a lot of books and stuff like that. We played a lot of cards. It wasn't bad. At least now it don't seem like it was. Back then I was a lot easier to satisfy as far as things to do than I am today. I'd have to have a golf game or two in before I reached shore. Yeah, then I didn't even think about it.
Now you had training in Tidworth Barrack in England?
We didn't have much training. We just got there and got ready to go across the channel. I think we spent 3, 4, 5 days there. Rained all the time we were there, so there wasn't much you could do. And then we boarded the LSTs and went across to the harbor.
What was the crossing over the channel?
Rough. It was always wavy. It shook a lot. It got kind of seasick there because it was moving all the time. And then all the excitement and everything of going over, just everything added up. So it wasn't nothing you'd want to repeat. Just had something you had to do. I didn't like the ocean too much all the time. It wasn't my idea of fun at all. Too much water. I wouldn't go back on another trip to Europe if somebody gave it to me free. I don't like to fly, and I sure heck wouldn't want to go on a ship.
Describe your first combat experience. Do you remember where you were and what year it was?
Yeah, it was, what the heck? We attacked a little town. There wasn't too much because we sat back and shot artillery fire in ahead of the troops, so anytime they called for any resistance, they had met any resistance, we just shoot it out. Then we advance up behind them and get close enough. But the first time we hit at night and we couldn't see nothing. We were just taking the FO's word for whatever we were shooting. He'd tell us where to shoot and we'd shoot. We didn't have any, as far as we were concerned, it was just another practice session. It wasn't, we didn't meet any enemy fire or resistance at all. After the real rough part didn't start till after we started getting into it, where we were moving every day. There was no stopping. We just hit one town. If it resisted, we'd go around it and attack another one. And the infantry companies, we'd cut off their supply lines, and then the infantry companies would come and wipe up the pockets or try to. And sometimes we'd attack from the back just to disperse them. See, that war was fought on you present enough targets till they run out of ammunition, then you capture them, and then you move up to the next one, and it was fought more or less than that. If they run out of ammunition before we did, then we won. If we run out of ammunition before they did, they won. But it wasn't the case of who was toughest. It was just mostly a supply and demand type of war. We had more gas, we had more ammunition. We won the war. Took a lot of targets died on the way, but But eventually, they couldn't defend against us. They just didn't have the ammunition or the manpower to do it. We went through a one Autobahn place there where they had airplanes parked alongside the Autobahn for miles. No gas. No pilots. All their equipment was dead. Tanks were sitting on the side of the roads where they run out of gas, they just leave them. Trucks. One of the last convoys we attacked was being pulled. One of the guns was being pulled by a horse and a mule. Not a horse and an oxen. And when he hit those, the personnel run away and left all the equipment there, and a lot of those animals were pretty bad shape because they got hit. We tried to just destroy the weapons, but you're not that accurate. So it is kind of sad.
Do you remember instances where you did actually run out of ammunition? How did you deal with that?
We usually just set up a defense position, waited for the ammunition to get there. Only did that when we were under General Patton. The other generals wouldn't send you in that spot.
How did you feel about General Patton?
Not too good.
He was a tough soldier.
Well, he was tough on the people that were fighting for him. He himself stayed back pretty comfortable. I think he slept in a soft bed every night.
So you have kind of harsh feelings towards him, or?
Well, he had his job to do, and that's not the way he thought he had to do it. He accomplished a lot. Lost a lot of men doing it. Probably lost more men if he'd waited longer to do what he was doing. So, do you lose 20,000 men in 3 days or 3 months? Either way, you're going to lose them. So we always had to figure they knew what they were doing, whether it looked right or not, where we were at.
How did your brother do?
Well, he was lucky. He got to drive for the executive officer, company executive officer. So they would only come up into the front lines when it was necessary. Most of their jobs was between company headquarters and battalion headquarters. They would lay us on between those two. So they really didn't get really into the heavy fighting too much. Lieutenant Walsh was his wife's little old bird. He wasn't going to get involved in anything he didn't have to. Could we take a break?
Yeah. Sure. Certainly. You getting warm if there is another.
Yeah.
You're hot.
Okay. Where do we go next?
We're talking about your brother.
Oh, my brother, yeah. Yeah, he was nice to have around all the time. I could always go back to him and get counseling and whatever needed to be in. So we got along good. It was just one of the best parts of being in the service, having him with me. I don't recall any incidents where we had any problems of any kind. It did cause a problem as far as being with the other men, because I didn't really make real close buddies with anybody else, because I always had him with me. So all the other people were just secondary, they were just part of the class. They weren't part of all my spare time stuff I'd spend with my own brother. Instead of, a lot of the other guys had real close friends in the unit. I didn't. And it's sort of a help, when I started losing them, that I wasn't real close to them. I did have some that were close enough to hurt, like Sergeant Gum and Sully, and those guys got killed in that one tank. We'd been through basic and everything, through all the training together. It was hard to lose them. But after that, it sort of got so, it didn't bother too much if we lost somebody. It was just part of the game. you sort of felt good that it wasn't you, actually, instead of feeling bad. It bothered more afterwards than during the war. After the war, you start thinking of it. But most of it, the fighting was done, we had 3 combat commands and one leapfrog the other, and we worked like that. And when we were on the front, we did the fighting. When they were not, we were in reserve well, usually what we were doing is cleaning our guns and greasing our tanks and changing the oil in the tanks and stuff like that, because that's one disadvantage of being a tanker than being an infantryman. The infantryman cleans his own weapons. We had to clean the tank and refuel it and change the oil, filters and all that, clean all the big guns and machine guns and everything. So by the time we got our 3-day break, we just finished doing all the work and didn't get much of a chance to rest like the other guys did. But I sort of liked being in the tank. Didn't have to walk as much anyway. We carried more supplies and stuff with us. So it was, if you were going to be in the war, I guess that we were in a better place to be. Didn't have to be worried about the small fire, just the artillery and the anti-tank guns and landmines and stuff like that. But the only where I really got involved in the fighting was when they had that battle in Hurlesheim. We got sent up we were in reserve as a defensive line, and our group got sent up behind a canal. Had a big bank, and we made red charts, and we had an FO post up on top of a hill. And we went up there, myself and another guy, and relieved the guys that were up there. And they said they'd seen some kind of motion in Sector 3 or 4 or something. I don't know which it was. We had the areas marked up in sectors. Said, but then they hadn't seen anything to watch that area. We watched it, we didn't see nothing. Then when we got night, we spent the night there. Next morning, we checked around, and we saw a couple of American tanks. It was probably around noon, about 2 o'clock, coming out of one of the roads in one of our sectors. So we called back on the radio. There's 2 American tanks coming out of on that road. And he says, well, let them come. He says, the 23rd Tank Battalion was captured, and said maybe some of them got away. So we let them come, and right behind them were 2 German tanks. And they got on that road far enough so they could see behind the canal, and they shot out our radio half track that kept track with battalions. So all they could do is he says, we see them, they're shooting us, we're getting out of here. Says, pick up the radio and get back as fast as you can, because we're going to blow the bridge. Because at that time you could see infantry coming out of all those woods, of those guys had seen and I think there was another tank in there. So we took off. We tried to pick up the radio, and it was too heavy because they opened up with the artillery, and the artillery was coming in. So we just dropped the radio and ran as fast as we could. The other guy was way ahead of me, because he hadn't stopped to help. He hadn't heard that, because he was watching with the binoculars. And he knew we had to get out of there, so he took off, and he was way ahead of me. He got across the bridge, and then they blew it before I got there. And there was nobody left on either side of the bridge with me. And part of the bridge was floating like a raft under the canal. I jumped on that to get across, and it blew up. And I landed on the opposite bank, but I passed out. And I kept trying to get up, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't see. Finally, a little red-headed boy a soldier came by and he says he wanted to find a radio because the artillery was landing on top of them and they knocked out their radio. And I didn't know what the radio was, so he just left me there and took off. Then I heard lucky for me, the ammunition after I had gone out for ammunition. And they were coming back. They didn't know the tanks weren't there anymore. And they drove up. And I was trying to answer the questions, but I couldn't think straight. So a tank shell hit and flew off. And they said, let's get out of here. And Ernie Gunderson grabbed me and threw me in the half track, and we all took off. And I sort of passed out. They thought I was asleep, but then we traveled for about a day and a half till we finally got back to where the unit was. That was one of my sad days. Another one that wasn't so sad was when he took the bridge in Dillons, and they wouldn't let me go across the bridge because I was hauling a load of ammunition. When the other tank had knocked out, they had given us a bigger tank that had used bigger ammunition, and they couldn't carry enough ammunition for it on the trailer for the tank, so they got another trailer full of ammunition, and I pulled it with we had a little weasel there to take ammunition up to the tanks. So I was driving that and hauling ammunition, and they wouldn't let me go across the bridge. They said, wait till dark before you can go with the ammunition. So I just parked at the side of the road, waiting there, smoking a cigarette. And finally, the kitchen crew came up. They didn't let them go across the bridge either. They parked them off to the side. They weren't essential. So the German lady walked out of a building and came up and says, we have a German officer in here. Says he wants to surrender, but he's scared to get shot. Would you take him? What's he supposed to do to surrender? So I told them, well, we'll go down and get him. We'll go down and get him. And so I asked the mess sergeant to go with me. We went down in the basement and got him. He put the weapon down, he put his hands on his head, came out, took him out, sat him on the place over there. He had been wounded on the leg a little bit. He was bleeding a little bit. And we talked to him. He couldn't speak German, and the lady interpreted a little bit and she said that there were more soldiers that wanted to give up in the buildings there. But could they come out? And he said, sure. He figured it 5, 6 cents. 200 of them came out. And here the cooks and myself were stuck with 200 prisoners. And I didn't know when I'd have to go, and neither the cooks because they came. And of course there was no danger with them because the road was full of tanks and half trucks and trucks full of soldiers going across the bridge. And so we lined out all those prisoners there. And that officer had been telling me that he wanted under the Geneva Convention, I was supposed to get him out of that area, get him out of the combat zone and danger. As soon as I got captured, I told him I don't even have anything to do for myself, much less for you. And then when he got all those 200, then he really was anxious about it. He wanted one of the German soldiers that could speak, because we lined him up and had to took all their knives and stuff away from him. And one of the soldiers says, may I speak? I speak English. He says, yes. I says, what do you want? He says, the bombs under the bridge, says, are too many. The people that put them in there left the area and left us here to blow the bridge. Says, but we were scared to blow the bridge because it would blow the whole area around here. Now we're scared to stay here because if it do blow up, says, it will take this whole area out. So I didn't know what was under the bridge. I couldn't see that far. That was far back enough so I couldn't see it. But I couldn't do that for them. But they wanted to get out of there because they thought if the bridge blew up, they'd go with it. And there was airplanes coming in trying to bomb the bridge out. In fact, one of those Stukas came down, and the aircraft hit it, and it just went up smoking and just made a loop and crashed way out of sight. Just a big loop. So finally they hollered my name and says, "Get ready to go across the bridge, it's getting dark." So I took off and I left Sergeant, what the heck was his name? Sergeant. I left him with the lieutenant from one of the areas there had come up and talked to this officer because he was making too much motion, so he came up, straightened him out, and told him that he'd have to stay there till we could have some way of getting him back. And I just left. And later on, I read in the Stars and Stripes that there'd been some people there and wrote the story up. That's but the only time I really was in close proximity with the Germans, because the rest of the time I was safely in my tank.
How were the German soldiers transferred out? Do you recall?
I think the MP battalions used to handle that. We told later on, when we were already proceeding real fast into Germany, we were going in a convoy. The Germans were walking right alongside the road without guards by themselves back. You know, their hands in there. They just marched back to where they could get taken care of. But there was sort of a understanding that if you took a prisoner, you took care of him. So it was kind of hard to take prisoners. But once you took a prisoner, you could get rid of him. I mean, you couldn't shoot him or anything. You know, you had to keep. So it was a pretty spooky area.
Did you encounter any French civilians?
A lot of French civilians.
What was the relationship there?
They were real happy to see us, real mad that we stayed there. The relationship between the civilians that would associate with the soldiers at all was on a give me a candy bar, give me cigarettes, give me this type of relation. The rest of the people shied away from us. You know, they stayed as far away from us as possible. But the ones that used to come up, they were looking for handouts, most of them. They weren't. When they first went through and got into the town, they were real happy to see us. But there was one place in Alsace where the guy said they had the American flag on one side and the German flag on the other, hanging on a pole. If the Germans were coming, they'd see the German flag, and we'd see the American flag. They could care less who was there as long as they left them alone. They were willing to live with either side.
What was your experience with the Battle of Heroldsheim?
That deal where I got that was right around Heroldsheim. My out unit didn't never go into Heroldsheim. It was I think it was 23rd Tank Battalion and somebody else, some of their infantry outfits were in there. I guess they took that town 2 or 3 times, and eventually there was a bunch of them captured there, and it took a while before they ever really settled. That was, I think, their toughest battle, where we had the most casualties, the most resistance. Because most of the other ones, they'd either run away, surrender, or die. They had 3 options. Towards the end, again, they mostly was running away or surrendering. In the beginning, while we were in France, they usually held the towns till we destroyed them. once we got into Germany, they tried to preserve their towns. They would not stay in the town. They'd move into the hills or the river banks or something like that, the canals and stuff like that. But while we were in Germany, they didn't care if we destroyed the towns or not. They'd hold them as long as they could, try to stop us. Once we got in Germany, of course, a lot of their big cities were destroyed by the aircraft anyway. But the smaller towns, they'd just surrender. They wouldn't fight too much for them, unless it was really a strategic point where they thought they could hold us and create enough delay that they might have a chance. Herlisheim was one of their last desperate places where they were trying to hold for their last gasp, I guess you might say. Because after that, it was mostly just if you drive up, they could surrender and you just keep on going. They'd be marching, like I said, they were marching one way, we'd marching the other. We pretty well knew that we were winning the war then, because they'd rather surrender than fight. They just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to kill them if they surrendered. Once they found out that we were taking prisoners, they'd give up. That's about it.
You mentioned when you were stranded on the other side of the bridge, you were hit. Were you wounded or what?
I never went to the medics. By the time I got back, my whole side was purple where I hit the ground. But by the time we got back, well, by the time we got where the guy slept that night, I stayed guard because I didn't feel like sleeping anyway. And I healed. I was young and I healed up fast. It was just a big bruise. I probably was rattled, but I didn't have brains enough to know it at the time. I never did feel like I wanted to go to a hospital or anything like that. I thought the shock of my folks would be too great.
How did your parents feel about the war? Were they very...
They weren't against it. They just didn't like it. I don't think there was very many people that were against the war in the United States then. They just hated to see their kids go. But they thought it was necessary. I don't think they could get that many people to go through what those people went through during World War II. We've seen too many wars that wasn't necessary since then. But back then we thought it was necessary, and it probably was. There might have been better ways to settle the score, but I think they could have negotiated something out of the deal. But I guess Hitler was pretty arrogant in his ways, and so were our leaders were wanting. I think they wanted to. It was a big economic help for this country to have the war. Wages went from $15 a day to almost $1 an hour by the time the war was over. Everybody stayed home, was living pretty comfortable. Well, there were jobs for everybody. In fact, they were freezing people out of jobs and stuff like that. Population was lowered quite a bit by all the people that didn't have kids while they were gone, and they never came back. So there's a lot of advantages if you want to be cruel enough to the war. You know, population in Europe was shrunk down to reasonable amounts again. So it was a terrible way to do it, but it happened.
Did you receive much mail from your family or friends at home?
Yeah, I used to write pretty regular. I was the lazy one. I used to let my brother answer, and I just put a PS under it. He had more time.
Have you kept those letters, or?
No, I don't know what they did. We had a lot of that information. My dad had it in his garage, packed in boxes, and my sister took my dad, and they got rid of all the surplus stuff that he had, and that went with it. I had a lot of little souvenirs and stuff, pins and medals and stuff like that I picked up. And then it was all gone. Had a lot of German money because we hit a few banks and they take the money for souvenirs.
Can you explain a situation when you went in and cleared out the homes or the buildings?
Well, you mean the clean out the buildings?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was, most of the time they were vacant. Once in a while you'd find a woman with a sick mother, or some woman hiding in the attic with a couple of kids that they thought we were going to shoot. And but most of the time, it was only 2 or 3 times that you find some soldiers in there, and when you'd see the amount of people coming in, they were glad to surrender. We never had to shoot anybody in the building. There was a few places where some of the other guys had to throw grenades in the windows because there's machine gun or something in there. But most of the time, we just shoot them out of the tank. If we could get a tank into the area, you just aim the tank and put a couple of shots of the machine gun in there so they get their attention, and they'd come out. That's the advantage of having a tank. They knew we could blow them out of there. So that was one of the easy parts. Some of those towns you couldn't get a tank in the streets. They were too narrow. Those you had to go in on foot and get them out. But the ones that had wide streets, well, you just throw the tank up there, point it out their window, and they'd come out.
Did you assist in the liberation of the death camps at all?
We had we stood guard on a camp. I don't remember if it was at Allen or Dasha or someplace like that. But it was so smelly and stinky that we were standing almost quarter mile, eighth of a mile away, and just guarded from up there. And they had the German soldiers, the POWs, going in there and cleaning up the mess, because they had stacked the bodies like cordwood, and then they decomposed. So what they do, they run a bulldozer and make a big trench, and then just push the whole stuff in there and cover it up. They didn't identify anybody. They just pushed them in home. Because it smelled pretty bad, by the way. So.
Did you have any experience with the German POWs? Other than what you just described?
We had just when we come at the camps. I never did guard a POW camp. We had a small camp of women prisoners that were soldiers in one area, but we just guarded them for a couple of days, and then somebody else took over and we moved on. But I never did. Like I said, we'd stand out far enough away so that we didn't have any association with them. And their own officers and everything handled them inside, so we didn't have to associate with them directly. In Nuremberg, we run into a bunch of political prisoners. We were going into the city. I don't know who was up ahead of us at that time. But they opened up this prison, and there's a bunch of these skeletons in white uniforms came out of there, and they were riding past us on bicycles, or if they could walk, they walked. And someone stopped by and asked for food, and the guys gave them K-rations. Killed them. That hard, they couldn't digest that hard cheese, and they just had convulsions and died. So they don't feed the prisoners, They let them wait till they get them to a soup kitchen or someplace. But the guys that tried to be nice to them just didn't do any good. They were too far gone. I don't know how many of them survived. But the ones that had enough strength, boy, they stole a bicycle or whatever, and they were riding those bicycles away from there as fast as they could.
What was your experience with the German civilians?
Well, at first they were very submissive because they were almost prisoners. We took over the town, we surrounded the town, we took over our people took over. Later on, they got pretty friendly. They were nice. They'd come in and offer to do our laundry and stuff like that. See, I spent 11 months after the war over there because I didn't have enough points to come back. So the Army of Occupation got to be, they were getting, in fact, towards the end, they were friendlier than the French because they'd given up any hopes of changing the situation. So they decided to live with it. And they weren't bad people. There were still some arrogant ones, but they didn't associate with us. They see us coming, they'd walk away. Someone said, Hitler, you going to throw rocks at us if they could, but they got over that. They didn't want to straighten them up.
Did you develop any friendships?
No. There was no fraternization there while I was there, and I really didn't have that good a feeling towards them.
What exactly did you do during your occupation?
Well, for a while we'd surround towns, go through the town, and if we run the civilians out, go through the town, search for weapons, have them bring their weapons out if they had any butcher knives or anything like that. They took all their weapons away from them, anything that they could use to stab a GI or something like that. And we'd pile it out and get rid of it. And after it got more peaceful, when the 12th came over, they sent me to a 771st Tank Battalion just because I didn't have enough points. And we got stationed at a little town called Baden-Baden. And my job was every other day I'd run the company paperwork or battalion paperwork to Nuremberg, where there was a big machine records division battalion there. They used to put all the information into microfiche or something like that, the tapes. And I'd run all our records up to them, turn them in. It'd take me all day to run there and back. The next day I didn't do anything. I was off, and the following day I'd do it again, every other day, and that's what I was doing when I got sent home. I get to travel see a lot of I'd find a new route every day, so I could see the country and get over there. My time was my own anyway, because they didn't care when I got back, as long as I was very ready for the following day.
What was the terrain like where you were at?
Where we were at, there was this Baden-Baden was a resort, sort of a spa type deal that the Germans had there, and we just took it over as a. Then it was pretty well. Going into Nuremberg, there was one of the roads running around the river, and the buildings were built up on a hill, sort of like Central City. I don't know if you've been to Central City in Denver, but the buildings were built right up the wall, and then the river was on the side, and the road went right along the river. Pretty nice, quaint little town like Rothenburg, where it was all walled city. There was four entrances into the city, and the city built like sort of like a wheels with spokes, you know. You go into the middle and you spread out in all directions. And it was a pretty cute little town. I had to drive some German doctor that got a pass from prison camp, and they asked me to drive him to his house. So I drove him to his house, and his daughter played the piano, and so they played some music for me while I was there. And I ate my lunch outside in my Jeep, and he stayed with the family all day. In the evening, I drove him back. But it was, most of the time, I got sent on detached service one time told me, take a Jeep and report to Lieutenant so-and-so someplace. It was an ordnance outfit. Those guys had bananas, they had oranges, they had steaks. And they had a refrigerator full, and they said, give me a little room like this, and this kitchen and refrigerator. And they took the Jeep, and they says, there's a phone there. When the lieutenant calls, answer it and he'll tell you what to do. He says, here's the refrigerator and this is all the food. Says, and I stayed there the whole week, eating out of that refrigerator and reading books and stuff like that. At the end of the week, they brought the Jeep back and said, okay, you can go. They just wanted my Jeep. They didn't want me. But I had a jolly good time. That was a good week. I enjoyed that.
Were you with anybody else, or it was just you?
No, I was all by myself.
Yeah.
I just me and my Jeep, and they took the Jeep. So it was a pretty good week. I got I got a month in London too. I went out, and that was pretty nice. I met some pretty nice people in England. I don't remember them, but they were nice too. And I got another pass to Nice, France, and I don't know why. That was on the coast, and it was France was pretty poor. There was hardly anything to do there. They didn't have nothing for you to do there. If you go to one NCO club or USO club in Nice, France, or you go to one in Berlin or any place else, there was just a USO club, and that's all there was in there. Just the beaches were all messed up. Most of them were out of bounds because they had landmines in them, and so you just walked around town for a month and then went back. Did
you go with your troop, or?
I went. They just had airplanes flying us over. They flew us. We go to Frankfurt. They load you up in a DC-3, I think it was. And they fly you in, land on the beach. And then when they were going to fly us back, when they were going to fly us, I had to ride the train back because when they were going to fly us back, they took off. They forgot to tighten the cap on the gas tank, and when he rolled over to turn to get back towards land, he was over the gas went sliding right down the wing. Boy, he just kept on going in a circle and landed again. Canceled the flight, and then the loaders on the train. It took us 3 days to get back.
Did you get to choose where your passes led you, or?
No, usually it was somebody else decided. I don't know if they had a lottery on it or they just figured he looks too dead to do anything else, might as well send him a pass or something. they sort of kept track of you, see how you were doing. Some of us were pretty bad shape, I guess.
Did you get to go with your brother, or was he in a different area?
No, I went. He stayed with the unit. I went by myself. I don't know. I think they sent him later, but they didn't send us together. They usually just one person from each platoon or something like that went in. So if you had a buddy with you, he didn't get to go with you. I was scheduled to go to Switzerland, but they said I could come home, so I came home instead.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, Switzerland didn't have that much to offer. I didn't know they had stole all that gold. Or maybe I'd gone over there, see if I can get some.
Explain, do you remember the day that they claimed that the war was over?
They told us May the 5th.
1940.
Well, they stopped us in May the 4th, 1945. Yeah. Stopped us in May 4th and says, just stop where you're at, says, we think the war's over. So we pulled into a little town and just stayed there. And the next day the orders came that the war was over. And they assigned us some other town to go and occupy and sort of guard it. So I don't know. So we went up to this town and surrounded it with tanks, and the people searched it. Infantry guys searched it, and then we moved in. So Schreiber's Fall, I think it was the name of it, way up in the hill, top of the mountain, part of the Alps. There was still a little bit of snow there in May, so it was up high. And from there, we went to a bunch of other little towns and surrounded them and searched them and stuff like that. That was 50 years ago. It's kind of hard to remember all that stuff. I can't recall much more that'll be of any interest.
What did you do when you came home? Did you work with your father, or?
Yeah, my mother had heart trouble, so they had moved into Denver. So when I came, I stayed with them in Denver. I moved in with them. My plans were to go to Clarence Hall. It was been that buddy of mine that would go to Abilene together. I had a year in college in Oregon, one of the universities in Portland, I think it was, or Eugene. And he says, when you get out of service, says, you come up here, says, under the GI Bill, says, we'll go to college together. His dad owned a lumber yard or some kind of lumber. He says, he'll give us part-time work, says, so we can supplement our income, says, and we'll just go through college, says, and then we'll see what we do after that. So I was all set on that. And I got home and my mom was pretty sick. And she didn't want me to leave, so I didn't go. I went to work after I got bored. The first year I had 9 W-2 forms, a bunch of little jobs, here and there and everywhere. And nothing steady. It was hard. Out of high school and out of service. And but when you come back about 11 months after the GI's been discharged, they've taken all the works, and then all the factories and everything was shutting down, so all the people were being unemployed. So it was kind of hard to find a job. I finally found a job as an apprentice in an engine rebuilding company. They're building engine rebuilding. Since there weren't any new cars, the engine rebuilding companies were doing a lot of business, so I went to work with them, disassembling motors and building motors, stuff like that. And I sort of I used to like machines all the time, so I sort of like that. Then I got involved with a bunch of guys that were rebuilding engines for race cars. So we'd stay there after work and rebuild these engines for race cars, and got involved in racing. Never did try much in the driving area of it, but I sure enjoyed setting them up and making them run right. And then the new cars started coming in, so the engine rebuilding business died out and the company shut down. So then I went to work for a bunch of other little places after that. And then we went to mechanic school. I decided that was part of the apprenticeship program. I was going to mechanic school. And International Harvester sent a representative out there to recruit. They were going to open a bigger branch here in Denver, so my instructor recommended me, so I went and got a job with them. I spent 32 years with them till they sold the place out. I raised a family with working for them, so.
When did you marry?
1949. About 3 years. That was another reason why I didn't go to college. So I think I met my wife and they didn't want to leave her.
In Denver?
In Denver, yeah. So anyway, it worked out, I guess, for the best. All my kids are growing up and they're all doing pretty good. Got a daughter that's a doctor in Phoenix, and my son's a detective with the Denver Police Department. My other two daughters work for the government. One's a grade 14 and one's a grade 10 or 12, something like that. So they're all doing pretty good.
Sounds like I'd be really proud if I were you.
I'm proud of them, despite the fact that I wasn't much help. I guess I helped, I don't know. My wife did a good job with them.
The what?
Okay. How about what's been your experience with the 12th Armored Association?
I signed up with it when I was still in service, when I was going to leave Germany, and then I lost track of them altogether. Never heard of him till Clarence Hall, the one I was going to college with, he sent in a booster deal for me and and entered me in the, and I've been keeping it up ever since. That was probably 1990 something, 91, 92, something like that. But up to that time, they had no idea where it was. I guess they lost my address. I didn't even know it existed. I had a card there with my souvenirs that I joined it, but I never did hear from it.
Did anybody else have any other questions? Or?
Just curious in the aspects of when you were over there in Germany doing the Army of Occupation, and you were doing your driving duty, how strict was the chain of command? Were you just allowed to do a lot of sightseeing, or was that just because you had a good job?
I think it pretty strict for they didn't want anybody to get lost and disappear. Because what happened, one of our motor sergeants decided to go back to a town we'd been in before to see. I guess he had a girlfriend over there, and we never knew what the reason why he went back. Because on the way back he crashed and killed himself, and nobody knew where he was till somebody found him and identified him and brought him back. So after that, it's just, you have to have authorized. You have to be authorized to go wherever you want to go. I never asked to go any place, so I don't know if there was a way of doing it or not. There probably was a way if you wanted to go back to see some place, or some of the guys had German relatives over there, and they'd want to go see him. I think they could get permission to go see him. I had nobody to see there. So.
I don't remember, you mentioned it. Do you remember what you were doing when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I was in high school.
You were in high school? Okay. I just didn't know if that's all I've got, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
We appreciate it a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you were very helpful.